Hello, everybody, and welcome back to At the Movies with William Fletcher. As per usual, I'm your host, William Fletcher, and this week I'm joined by Rohan Cooper. Say hello.
Hello,
Hello.
how's it going?
I'm doing alright, how are you?
Good, thanks, good, thanks.
That's good. So, you chose a film for this week, and you
Uh-huh.
chose Get Out.
I did, yes.
Yes. So why did you choose Get Out? I guess I should start with that. Why was that what you
Well,
chose?
it's a very unique film.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very, because the director, he's my favorite, currently he's my favorite, horror thriller director, but he
Mm.
uses a lot of
Alright.
themes, like race,
Yeah.
and sort of, uh, manipulation in his films, which is
Mm-hmm.
really unique, and I find it, and the way he does it in Get Out,
Yeah.
really sort of is a order story. So it
Mm.
starts to unravel. It's really interesting when you watch it the first time, unexpected plot
Mm.
twist.
Yeah.
So
Mm. Yeah. So you liked. So I'm assuming you liked Get Out. Then you thought it was good.
yeah, I
Yeah.
really liked it. Yeah.
Um, I enjoyed it, but I think it's possibly overrated. Like, not possibly. I do think it is overrated to a certain
Mm.
degree. So have you seen Us? Have you seen?
I have,
Hmm.
I have.
And
I
what were
really
your?
enjoyed it.
You really enjoyed it. Which do you think was better?
I
And
think Get Out was better, but I
hmm
feel like Get Out was a better film as a whole. I feel
hmm
like.
yeah.
It was more cohesive and it had a better story to it.
hmm
But I feel like Us had more of a interesting concept behind it,
yeah.
um, where it used um, modern historic events such as holding hands across America to
hmm
really drive the plot.
yeah. Yeah.
And then they used that sort of movement to build horror around it, which actually striking imagery that
Mm.
really kind of left a mark on you.
Yeah. Yeah. I prefer Us as a film. I think it's a much better film. Not much better, but I do think it is the better of the two. I just think I think first of all the performances are much better in that film, and I'm sure we'll get to that with Get Out. But sort of broad strokes that the acting and the performances in Us were better. I just thought the story was more interesting,
Mm,
and I think that I just think the writing was better for Us.
hmm Yeah. It definitely is. The movie I noticed, Us, is a response to the criticisms of Get Out.
Hmm.
Definitely.
Yeah,
There's a lot of in there where clunky dialogue in Get Out, where the director, I forget his name now,
Jordan
um,
Peele.
Jordan Peele, he he's a response. He uses Us as a response to the criticisms of Get Out,
Hmm.
which enhances Us to a level above Get Out in some areas, especially
Hmm.
dialogue.
Yeah.
So
Hmm. Yeah. Um. So I guess is there like a place you want to start with Get Out? Like is there a specific thing you want to talk about first, or do you just sort of want to
um,
like go through the film, sort of
maybe
see
sort of the
theme?
themes and sort of yeah,
Yeah. So do you want to start with that then? Do you want to? Is there anything
yeah.
you want to start with in particular?
Obviously, obviously the main one is segregation and racism. That
Yeah.
is the main theme of the film. It's the core pillar,
Mhm.
which the whole film is revolving around.
Mhm.
Which I feel like Jordan does really well
Mhm.
uh, to sort of emphasize a fish out of water story where everyone is white and the main protagonist is African American.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and it's from perspective, so he's experiencing it as we're experiencing it.
Yeah.
So we're inside, I guess you could say, the main protagonist's head.
Yeah.
We're thinking what he's thinking, while everyone else is looking in at you.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and that sort of fish out of water uh, perspective really is emphasized by another theme, which is sort of vulnerability there.
Mm-hmm.
Vulnerability is a big one because the director composes a lot of shots where he's just walking peacefully along the yard at the party at the beginning of the film, and he could be just going to go talk to someone, and the background you see several people all staring at him, looking up and down.
Mm-hmm.
That relates to the plot twist further in the film, which with a second viewing makes the film a lot more layered than you thought it was initially. Yeah. Well, following on from that point of rewatchability, I mean, you've got directors like Nolan and Tarantino that add so much to their films that you really got to, especially with the film Tenet. I mean,
goodness, I had in a previous episode that I recorded with Kitty, we talked about Tenet and Christopher Nolan, and how he's sort of gotten to a point of like, I think it's more concept for, like, he doesn't really focus on story much. He focuses more on like rewatchability,
spectacle,
and the spectacle and the concept.
Spectacle, yeah. Bringing it back to Get Out, it's a movie that the director didn't really go all out, and he just kind of, it was his first big movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Big high budget blockbuster, or not blockbuster, but high budget movie.
Yeah.
So, as sort of a contrast to Nolan, he is more sort of restrictive and sort of meticulous with every scene that he does for Get Out, making it so that the film is rewatchable but also makes sense.
Yeah.
And that is where Nolan fails in some of his films.
Yeah.
Especially Tenet. It can be quite daunting to really watch a film like that because it's so jumpy and all over the place. And that's something that Pulp Fiction does as well.
Yeah.
But Tarantino executes it in a way that's cohesive. I don't know how he does it, but he did it.
Yeah.
It still blows me away how he's done it.
Yeah.
But Get Out is obviously a very straightforward sort of first act, second act, third act type film, where there's obviously beginning, middle, end. That it makes sense from a first time viewing, but also is layered the second time because you notice things, and that also goes for Us, the film Us as well. You can notice a lot of things, the symbolism, especially with symbolism is a huge thing in Us. You've got rabbits in the catacombs, I guess they are, or the tunnels underneath the surface.
It's a very, and I don't know if I want to say ambitious film, but it's definitely a film that, like, it's not very common to see. Like, sort of, it's not like in that you don't see many sort of films like Get Out wasn't a big film per se, but it was like this big hit, and it's not as often as it possibly should be to see massive hit like these films that are hits that are sort of about black issues, because I think when you look at like sort of a lot of the like highest rated and like highest grossing films of the year, it's always like sort of, you know, it's sort of like the same few studios and the same few franchises, and you don't see and people talk a lot about these, and a lot of movies, very good ones that have got about black issues or other, or you know, issues that other people face. It's not shown, I guess, as it would be in a lot of like, and I think this is an exception. Like a film that made like a lot of money and was beloved by mostly everyone, about with a black lead and about black issues. And I think it's nice to see that because we don't typically see it as much as maybe we should.
Yeah.
Like Jordan Peele has said that in his films he probably won't cast a white lead, which I don't necessarily have a problem with, because I think the stories he's telling,
that's his style.
Yeah, that's his style, exactly.
That's his
style, yeah. And I think that also makes sense because he's telling stories about black people. So of course there'd be black people in it. And I think people that complain about,
he's African American as well.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's coming from a place where it makes sense, you know.
Yeah, and I think people who complained about that, like, oh, why is he doing that? That's racist or whatever. It's like, well, first of all, it's not, because the stories he's telling, you can't have a white lead. Like, Get Out doesn't work if you've got a white guy in it.
Exactly. If
Like,
it's white, it makes no sense. It's the same with. I mean, you could sort of have Us with white lead.
Us is
but it
much
works
more
better African American lead.
Yeah, I think Us is sort of made in a way where it could be anyone, like the main family could be played by anyone basically, but it's not the race of the main characters is not part of the story. It just happens to have black people as the lead.
Where in Get Out, the racial strains and sort of racial prejudice and segregation is at the core of the film.
Yeah, and that only works if you've got a black.
And if you were to take the main protagonist out and make him white, it would just fall apart.
Yeah, because it doesn't make sense, because, and I think that is, and I think there are a lot of times in films, it's sort of, I don't think the race or the gender of the character matters, but in Get Out, it does matter, because it's telling a story of, like, racism that African American people have faced, and the whole, like, sort of subtle pieces of racism. Like, there's that scene where Chris, the main guy, he's sort of going around talking to these different people, and they're all asking these very, like, subtly racist questions, I guess you could say. And some of them, I was just very, like, do people actually ask that? Like, there was this one bit where he's with his girlfriend, and they're talking to this woman, and she's, like, making reference to, like, his dick, and he's like, is it better? Or something like that. And I was very much like, is that actually, like, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, because I don't know, but I just think that's a very interesting thing to have a character say, and I'm just wondering how accurate that is. Like, again, Jordan Peele has a better understanding of it than I do, because I haven't lived in that world, and I haven't had the problems that he's more than likely faced, you know?
Yeah.
And I think, and I don't know, I think films that are about racism, like, do you think that a white person could make Get Out, or, like, a movie about racism? Do you think they can do it? Like, do you think that the story would be the same?
I think they could, but wouldn't be as effective.
Yeah.
From the perspective of a white person.
Yeah.
Mainly because obviously they don't have that sort of connection with the source material, where they have that sort of background of family, maybe a great family, like back in 1800s, all that incredibly racist periods of time, where there's stories and incidents that have been passed down through the generations to Jordan Peele. That he can sort of, what's the word? Sort of embody in his films.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I sort of agree with that. I feel that a filmmaker should be allowed to make whatever story he or she wants to tell. Like, I don't think it matters per se, but I do think at some point they have to, like, I don't, like, when Django Unchained came out, there was, like, lots of criticism towards Tarantino for telling that story, you know, from just, like, general critics and just general people and other filmmakers, and I do think that they make a fair point. I also think it's also fair that he should be allowed to tell, he should be allowed to tell that story if he wants to, and I don't think Django Unchained as a film is... It's not like about racism per se. It's sort of more like it's not like Django Unchained isn't the same as something like 12 Years a Slave, for example. Like, it's a very different kind of film. You know, it's a much more. I don't know if action film.
I can't really put an opinion in here because I haven't seen the film yet.
Oh, okay.
So.
Well.
But I know what you mean. Mm-hmm. I know what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to base it off 12 Years a Slave, but. Yeah. Isn't Django Unchained sort of more of a subtle racist film, more so than a full-on?
Well, I've only seen it once. I'd have to watch it again, but it's not like the main character at the beginning. He is a slave, but he sort of, the story develops, and he has to rescue someone, and it's much more of like it's probably the most. It's one of the more. It's one of Tarantino's more action-based films, I guess. To sort of bring this back, because we keep going on these tangents, and to bring this back to Get Out, I think that this film has some violence in it, but it's only sort of really towards the end, and when there needs to be violence, like when Chris is like
It makes sense that there's violence there.
Yeah, where he's like escaping, where he's like killing the family and everything, and like he's doing all these things to escape. And I think that is
There's
good.
also,
And sorry, and I think that is a problem with some horror films is they'll just do violence for the sake of violence. But Get Out, it has violence, but only when necessary, and it's only really towards the end. Like, and I think that it doesn't. Yeah, it's not like it's possibly overly violent, but in the context of the story and where the character is at that point, it makes sense that he might be like that. One of my older sisters, she does not like Get Out. She is not like a big fan of it, and she sort of raised this point on that. Sort of the ending could be seen as like the way Chris is acting. It could sort of be perpetuating the sort of stereotype that some people might have that black people are overly violent, with like him killing all those people at the end. And I think that is an interesting point to bring up, and I don't know if I agree with it exactly, but I think that is a very interesting concept, a very interesting idea to discuss.
Yeah. Well, if from the point of sort of racial stereotyping, and also with violence being used at the very start of Get Out, the scene where they hit a deer is a very important scene because it shows the police pull up and
that scene. I thought that scene was actually very well done because I feel like that's I have never been in that situation, but I think that is possibly very accurate from stuff that I have seen, of how, like, I saw this...
It establishes immediately that the police can rely on the police when he's in trouble. So it immediately gets rid of the sort of question of every sort of horror film is like, why don't you just call the police?
Yeah, and that is true, and I think it's not just... They just wrote that in for the sake of it.
The scene really does get paid off at the end of the film as well.
Yeah.
With his mate, the security guard man.
Yeah.
Guy comes up and pulls up, and then the viewer's thinking he's been framed. He's been absolutely framed because he looks like he's killing. Well, he is killing her.
Yes,
but from the cop's perspective,
it's like that's all he's doing. It's not self-defense. Yeah. And I didn't really remember it, so I was just sort of thinking in my head as like, because I was just sort of thinking in my head, I sort of had it in my memory that he survived, but I'm thinking, but this cop has just pulled up, so maybe he doesn't, because I had like not met, and I was just like, this is not gonna go well, and then his friend hops out,
flips it on its head, it on its head, and
I'm like, oh, that's a nice way of addressing that, and a nice sort of doing it different, it's sort of. Not what you would expect, It's a, I guess you could say, and I like that it sort of gives it I guess it's a happy ending, but it's like sort of a melancholy and a bittersweet ending.
Bittersweet, bittersweet is the way to say it. Because he gets away, but he's a completely different person. I mean, he's lost his girlfriend, who really didn't even care for him in the first place.
Yeah.
And he's lost his sort of previous self. He's obviously mentally damaged by it. You can tell.
Yeah.
Even though they do share a joke at the end.
Yeah.
It's still very bittersweet because he survived, but he lost everything that was established within the film. So.
That's another thing I wanted to talk about is the comedy. Because, this was, as a film was nominated at the Golden Globes for a couple Golden Globes for comedy, and I was like, I didn't really see this as a comedy when I first saw it. I was like, that's interesting, But having rewatched it for this, I was like, there is more comedy than I than I remember there being, and I don't think a lot of it works. Like, I think there are some jokes that work very well, but I think there are times where it's like that doesn't fit. Like, you didn't need to put a joke there.
Done wrong, it absolutely annihilates films.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the best example I can think of is It 2. It Chapter 2, the new one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I will admit, I do like the film, but
I enjoyed that film, but
I do think that is a fair point that at times the comedy, it's like you didn't need to put a joke there, that doesn't work. And that's that's a problem I also have with both Get Out and Us, is that there are times where it's like the comedy doesn't work. It's like you didn't like. There's a scene in Us where they've just killed this family, like an evil version of this different family, and they're talking, and it's just all very tense. And then one of the kids tells like a couple jokes, and I'm just like, why? You didn't need to do that. You had like a very nice, it was just very well done, and you didn't need to put that there. And I think there are some films that, like horror films, that do comedy very well, but they are typically horror comedy. Like they're comedies with like horror elements, like Scream.
Yeah.
I love Scream, and that's more of a comedy with like pieces of horror, whereas this is horror with pieces of comedy. And I think it works if you do.
But I think
comedy.
Get Out does it. Get
like,
Out in most cases sort of doesn't. It sort of pulls back on it. It doesn't really emphasize the jokes. It makes, especially in some of the earlier scenes, it makes sense, comedy placements.
Yeah.
But towards the end of the film, some of them are a bit misplaced. But a lot of the comedy towards the second half of the film is basically just him sort of commenting on his situation.
Yeah.
So
I will give it that a lot of the comedy is sort of before all the crazy stuff happens. It's sort of at the beginning, and sort of with his friend who's sort of talking to the the police and everything. I think it works there in a way. Like I think like there's not as much comedy during when it's meant to be sort of scary and thrilling and stuff. But I think there are a couple jokes that I was just like, you didn't need to put a joke there. That wasn't necessary.
Yeah, I mean, the comedy in certain films just doesn't really enhance it. Like especially for It Too. It's a direct when it comes to the execution of comedy, it's a direct contrast to Get Out because It Chapter 2 does it in spades.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's doesn't align with the established characteristics of a certain character within that's being shown or who has said the joke.
Yeah.
Where Get Out, the main protagonist is established to be a light-hearted, sort of jokey guy that can take certain situations seriously.
Yeah.
So it makes sense. But some jokes in other horror movies just don't make sense because it's usually there just for the sake of a joke, And
I think that sort of goes beyond horror. I think like in a lot of the recent like Marvel movies and Star Wars stuff, there's like too many jokes in some scenes to the point of like they're just adding jokes for the sake of adding jokes, and I don't think that they work in a lot of those cases. Some of them do, but I think that there are times where it's like you didn't need to do that. That didn't need to be there. You're sort of adding it for the sake of adding it.
And I mean that mindset is kind of ruined certain franchises, like the DC franchise. The lack of comedy actually kind of ruined it.
Yeah, I think there needs to be sort of a balance. Like you can't just have out and out comedy, but you can't have no comedy. You need to hit sort of the fine line.
But there's certain films such as Dunkirk and Saving Private Ryan has jokes in it. But those serious type of, I guess the best example is war films. They don't need jokes.
That is true. I do think that is a fair that not everything needs to have jokes, But I think it's something like maybe like a comic book film. You can put jokes in there because it's sort well, I think that I would say that does sort of depend on the setting and like the story you're trying to tell. Like if you're sort of setting the film in sort of a light-hearted universe with sort of just these wacky, weird characters, you can put jokes in there because it's sort of because the universe that is being established is already just crazy enough as is. But in something like Joker, you shouldn't put jokes in there, like ironically.
Yeah.
But because that film
Yeah.
doesn't, you shouldn't have jokes in that because it's a much more serious story that they're trying
It's
to tell.
Yeah.
It's
a story trying to tell a story about mental disability and mental instability.
Yeah.
But the thing is with Joker, it actually does use comedy in a way it doesn't use. It uses sort of monotone comedy. Comedy that doesn't sit right with you, but is also somewhat funny.
Yeah.
Because of what the joke is. It's not the joke that's funny, it's what the joke is. What it's representing, I guess you could say. Because obviously the Joker is a clown, and a clown's built to make people laugh. And that's why I guess it's such a popular choice for horror films, is because it can really sort of justify the back and forth between comedy and horror. But films like Get Out don't have that privilege to allow a back and forth genre switch. So it really has to be careful, which it was. It was very careful, but there was a couple issues with it. But in my opinion, I don't think it ruins the film to a degree such as It Chapter 2 sort of reduced the film's quality. It didn't ruin Chapter 2, but it reduced its effectiveness and quality. But Us as well, Peele's other film, Peele's other film, sorry, he does use jokes in there, but he uses them in a way that sort of pushes the plot forward and sort of connects to historic events, which then brings us back to the point that he learns from his previous film. Peele learns from his previous films, where he obviously did make a few mistakes with comedy and Get Out, which he then just justified with, I guess you could say, evidence and historic practices and character traits in Us, which enhance that film. So,
and I think for a first-time film, for like, you know, Get Out, I think it's very much like it's somewhat ambitious, and I do like appreciate that he was sort of willing to do what he wanted. I guess you could say, sort of telling a story that he wanted to tell, and sort of did what he, you know. But it wasn't to like a point where he just tried to do something so ambitious that it's like, what is the plot of it? What is the point of this? There's nothing to this, like, you know. And I think that it's a very admirable attempt for, you know, a first time film, that, you know, to do something like Get Out.
Yeah. I mean, he's got talent. He definitely has talent. Yeah. And I feel like through each film he refines his talent.
Yeah.
And Get Out was his first sort of swing at it. I thought it was a fantastic first try.
Yeah.
You know, because usually a lot of films, a lot of directors' first high-budget films aren't the greatest. You know.
Yeah. Like there are some directors who sort of have just amazing first films, and there are some who just sort of don't. You know.
Yeah. And then they kind of fizzle out over time.
Yeah.
You know.
Performances, I think, in this film.
I was about to say that.
Yeah. Because we've talked, I think in other episodes that I've recorded, we sort of talked about performances, we sort of talked about themes in like another episodes I've done. We've sort of talked about themes, but we've also talked about performances very early on. And we've been going for a long time. And I think I should bring up that I think Daniel Kaluuya gives a very, very good performance in this. And I think that he's a very well, and I think he's just very well written. And I want to see what Daniel Kaluuya does next, because I think he gives a very good performance. Like, not an amazing performance, but it's like, with what he has to do and what he's given, he is very good.
Yeah.
In that performance.
And I mean, Alison Williams as well. She plays a really convincing...
She's the girlfriend, right?
Yeah. She plays a very convincing switch to the bad guy.
Yeah.
Or the bad person. The antagonist, you could say.
Yeah. I do think that's very good, because it's not like... And I do like that sort of scene where it's sort of, there's the twist that, oh, this family is evil, and she's like sort of looking through like the keys or whatever, and she's doing all this thing, and then she just sort of like switches like that to being evil. And I think that's very like good sort of acting on her part, and I think that I like a lot of big, like, sort of bombastic performances, but I also really enjoy very just sort of subtle performances, sort of like, and I think that's what she gives, is a very subtle performance, and she's not...
Yeah.
And, you know, and I think there are some...
Well, I mean, you can say that for the whole film. Get Out is a very subtle film. I mean, if you look at the subtleties of the film, you can pick up a lot of things, and you can predict a lot of things.
Yeah.
Which really does go back to the layering of the film and adding rewatchability, you know?
Yeah. But, so, yeah, that is a very fair point, and I like, think that not a lot of... These aren't, like, amazing performances, but they're all very much, like, they're doing a good job with what they have to do, and there's no, just, like... there's no one, like, stealing the show, per se. There's no, like, just, oh, that is a great performance.
Yeah.
It's more just, they all give good performances, but they don't need to... they don't need to give
like
massive
a Heath Ledger performance in there or anything. It's just very much passable. It's good.
Yeah. But I think that works as well, because I think if they were going too far with it, and they were just being very, like, over the top and just giving, like, doing all these crazy things, it wouldn't work, and that would possibly would sort of take me out of it even more, because it's like they are doing too much, and you don't need to.
Yeah.
And I don't think every film needs to have a performance that's just, like, doing everything. Like, it's a lot better when there's a lot more at times where if there's the more subtle approach is the much better approach in some cases. And I think this film gives very subtle performances, and that works a lot better. Whereas in Us, I think there's bigger performances in that film, but justifiably so, because, you know, there's the family, and then there's their alter egos, I guess, and they are much different. So I think you sort of need to, in that case, give bigger performances for the various different versions of those characters.
Yeah.
I think that, I just think that, like, the whole cast does a very good job, and I don't think there's, like, it's nothing amazing, but, like, that not every film needs amazing performances, you know. You can just have good performances.
Yeah. Because, I mean, it's that's the good thing about acting, really. There's some films that don't require good acting.
Yeah.
You know? So, you know, I mean, a perfect example of that is Star Wars.
Yeah.
Pretty shoddy acting throughout the whole franchise.
Yeah, like, even in, like, the objectively good films, I would say that, those are not good performances. But it doesn't need to be something, you know.
There's still, most of them are still good films.
Yeah.
Some of them are really good.
Mm-hmm.
But they still, every single one of them has some actor that's just not really doing well, you know?
Yeah.
And it's noticeable.
Mm-hmm. That is true. And I think there are some scenarios where if you've only got, like, a couple, like The Lighthouse, for example, has got, like, 2 characters in it, basically. And with that, since it's only 2 characters, you probably need sort of bigger performances in the actors to do more, because you've only got 2 characters, and so it works. But with this, there's, like, several different characters, you know, at any one time. So you don't need that, per se. You just need good performances that sort of carry the film, you know?
Yeah. Well,
Is there any final things you want to say? Like, is there anything else you want to say? Because we've been recording at this point for an hour and 14 minutes. With
wow.
a thing I want. I like some of the callbacks that the film makes. You made a reference earlier to the police thing, where like he can't just call the police because of the racism and everything. But another one
That was established. Yeah.
That was established. Yeah. Another one I liked was when he's getting that picture of that guy to like sort of send to his mate, and there's the flash and everything, and the guy just sort of reverts back, I guess, to his former self, and he's got like the nosebleed and everything, and he's yelling at him to get out. And I liked that callback at the end of the film where he's being chased and attacked by the guy, and then he uses that to, and I like that. I think that is very good, because I think in some films where they do callbacks, it's very clunky. Like they set some, like, as set up and payoff, and there are some movies where it's very clunky, and it's like, oh, that's obviously going to come back for later. But this, I think you don't think about it.
Yeah, you can tell that something has been set up just so that something else could happen at the end of the film.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a problem that I think some films might face. It's like, oh, there's like a setup, so like, oh, they establish this thing, they establish either this power or this character thing, and you're like, okay, so that's going to come back later. You don't know when it's going to come back, but it's like, it will come back.
Yeah.
But I think in Get Out, it's done in a way that because I also sort of, you don't really think about it, I guess. You're just like, huh, that's like interesting, for me anyway, I wasn't really thinking about it. And I don't do that a lot of times in films. I don't really think like, oh, this could come back later, unless it's very obvious.
Yeah.
And I think in this case, it was done in a very decent, subtle way. Yeah, subtle way.
Yeah. Yeah. There is one thing I do want to touch on is how well Peele names his films.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it.
That is
Us
true.
and Get Out describe the film, their respective films, perfectly.
Yeah, that is a very good point. And I think that some films, that is a very good point, actually. I think with most films, the title should... it should have sort of explain, I guess, or it should make sense. Like, you shouldn't just name it something.
It should relate to the plot of the story.
Yeah, like sort of with some of Tarantino's films, some of the titles make sense.
Yeah,
like Django Unchained, or like Inglourious Bastards, or The Hateful Eight. Those titles make sense. It correlates to the story. It's like, oh, that's what that means. But there are some cases where it's just sort of like
Pulp Fiction, yeah.
There's no
It doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. Or like Reservoir Dogs, for example. It just that doesn't relate but I think I will say that though with most of Tarantino's other films, the titles all at least make sense. Like they're all either named after something in the film, or they're just sort of, it makes sense. Like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, that makes sense. It takes place in Hollywood, and it's sort of like a fairy tale story, you could say. And that goes with his other films as well. And I think that Get Out and Us is like a very good example of the titles sort of they work. The titles make sense. Like you might not get what they mean at the beginning of the movie, like before you've watched it.
And that's a good thing.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
A good title entices you into the film.
Yeah.
But also makes even more sense once you've watched the film.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I think, and I think they're also very basic titles. Like, he doesn't try and go too much with them. He just like one or two words. That's all he needs for the title, and it makes sense. And he doesn't try to make it like, he doesn't try and make it another thing. He tries to make it something simple, and that goes along
simple and effective.
Yeah, and that's what you could say the basic premises are, and you could sort of, like his film, you could sort of watch them, and they are sort of that. They are sort of simple, effective on like a base level. Most people could watch Get Out and be like, I got that, I liked that, and that's it. But other people can sort of analyze it and sort of get more interpretations from it. But I think either way, that works. And I think that's what films should do in general, is they should sort of work for like a general audience, you know? Like, they should sort of be very... I'm not saying easy, but like, an audience needs to should be able to understand and explain what the movie was about, you know?
Yeah. And Peele's titles do that perfectly. I know he has a new film.
Yeah, he's got I think it's Candyman, I think it is. He's not directing it, though.
No, he's not. He's involved with the film.
Yeah, I think he's like... I forgot. Wait, give me a second. I think he's a producer... Or maybe he's a writer on it. He's got like a part of... He's got like a credit on the film. He is a writer and producer on it.
Right. So he would have no control over the titles.
No.
Of the film.
Well, I mean, he did write it, though, so he would probably name...
He probably
probably
had some input to the name.
Yeah.
But I feel like he didn't name it.
Yeah.
Like,
but officially. Also, it is based off of, like, a previously written story.
Yeah, it's an adaptation of a novel.
Yeah. So I think that I think, like, that's a good thing about Peele, is that he doesn't try... Like, he has sort of the subtleties and there's sort of nuances and sort of hidden details, but he doesn't make, like, the whole film that. Like, he has, like, the basic plot, and then he adds to that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what filmmakers, in general, should try and strive for. Like, yes, that's, like, I think... We keep going back to Nolan, but I think he sort of has the high idea, like concept, has the high concepts, you know, like has the crazy concepts.
Yeah,
but he
has
doesn't
the
sort
ideas
of,
to make a film that people will remember.
But he doesn't try and sort of simplify. He doesn't sort of start with like a base idea and then expand upon it. And I think it's better if you have the basic concept and expand upon it. And that's the thing.
Yeah.
Jordan Peele does very well, is like you could explain what Get Out and Us are about, like, very simply, you know, like, they're very basic films to explain. And then, but that's not all it is on the surface, you know, there's more to it than just what is, you know, explained.
Yeah. I mean, Nolan definitely just doesn't care what people think. I think that he's gotten to a point where he just doesn't care where people think. And it could be good and bad. I mean, I feel like Tarantino has gotten to that point, but he's controlled it.
Yeah, I think the thing about Tarantino is he sort of got to that point sort of in the midpoint of his career.
Yeah.
Like,
when Nolan got to that point really early.
Yeah.
Because he made consecutive good films.
Yeah.
He made like 3 fantastic, some of the best films of all time. Dark Knight. I feel like Dark Knight was a turning point for his style, because Dark Knight seems very sort of... It's a really well-made film, but it also feels sort of, for lack of a better term, sort of restrictive from his design.
And I think that's a problem that like Tarantino, he did, like, sort of in the mid 2000s, he did stuff like Kill Bill and Death Proof, which was very self-indulgent, not particularly loved films, like he'd done Pulp Fiction, everyone was like, oh, Pulp Fiction, but he got to that point of making Kill Bill and stuff very self-indulgent and just making whatever he wanted, and people were just like, that's not good. And since then he sort of turned it around, and he's been making good to fantastic films ever since then. Whereas Nolan, he sort of he hasn't gotten to that. Like, Nolan sort of didn't have that point in the middle of his career. He's having that point now in his career. And I think
he's starting to make... I feel like Nolan is going to make in the near future. I feel like his next film is going to be I feel like my next film is his next film is going to be quite average, because I feel like if it's following the trend of this film, of Tenet, it's just going to be horrible, because if he hasn't learned from his feedback,
Yeah.
on Tenet, it's just not going to go well. But
Yeah.
we're on a big tangent again
Yeah.
to Nolan.
So to get back to Jordan Peele, I don't know if Jordan Peele is going to reach that point as like a filmmaker. I think he.
I don't think he will.
Because if you look at the budget, so like I'll just get up like the budget of Get Out. So he made the film. He had a budget of 4.5 million as just the budget, and at the box office it made 255.4 million. So that's a very good profit that was made off that film.
Yeah.
And then if you look at Us, he had a budget of 20 million and made 255.2 million dollars for Us. And I think that's a very very smallish budget based on what he could have done. Because of the success of Get Out, I talked about this in a previous episode that I did on Us, is that he probably could get whatever he wanted. Like, he could get the budget that he wanted to make whatever he wanted, but he has sort of restricted and controlled himself. And you made that a point earlier of, like, he likes to restrict himself because he wants to make more with less. And that's a point that you made earlier on.
With less sort of resources, you can make a really good film, because some of the best films have come out of very low budgets.
Yeah. Sort of like with Tarantino, like Reservoir Dogs had an incredibly small budget. It only had a budget of $1.2 million, which is why you don't see stuff like the Heist or anything. But it works because it didn't need to have a massive budget. And Jordan Peele, again, is at that point of, like, he can have whatever he wants, but he doesn't need it because the stories he's telling doesn't require him to have massive budgets.
His stories are small scale.
Yeah. Like, Us is a comparatively probably bigger film, but it's not like it's a high concept idea that he's making. Like, it's not a Nolan film where he's just sort of making crazy, like doing just crazy stuff. It is a basic film that probably needs a bigger budget, but the budget goes to good use. And I would argue that I would also argue that Get Out is, like, as a film anyway, it's a small budget, but what he does with that budget, he does a lot.
Yeah. Agreed. Definitely. And I mean, some of the best work, man, really low budgets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, not saying $10 million is a low budget.
No.
But Mandalorian, each episode has $10 million per episode.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's some of the best Star Wars that there is. You know? You can bring that to other TV shows per episode. Something like Game of Thrones, it has a couple $1,000,000 per episode, and it has some of the best storytelling in TV show history. You know,
in the earlier seasons, in the latter seasons, it got.
Well, we're not here to talk about quality here. We're here to talk about.
No, but I do think that is a fair point. That in a lot of cases, smaller budgets work, and I don't think Jordan Peele is gonna have his films have massive budgets going on, because he doesn't seem like a guy who needs a mass amount of money to make a film. You know, like, my personal opinions aside, like, I think Get Out is fine. I don't think it's amazing or anything, but I have to give him credit in that he did a lot with the film, and that what he did do was very ambitious and was very well done as a film. Yeah,
I feel like I'm excited for his future films just because of Get Out and Us.
Yeah. He's a filmmaker who I just want to see what he does next, because I think whatever he does next, whether I like it or not, it is going to be interesting, and it's going to be something I have not seen before.
And you know it's going to be unique.
Yeah, exactly.
Regardless if it's good or not, it's going to no doubt be unique.
Yeah,
unless he just does something stupid.
Yeah, it's going to be it's going to be a story that I haven't seen before, something that so few directors and and writers as well would think of, because it's very unique concept, you know.
Yeah. Well, my battery's running out.
Yeah. So do you just want to give a quick? Yeah, we've been recording for nearly an hour and a half at this point. So
Yeah.
do you just want to?
Is this your longest podcast?
I think this is. I think I did one with Kitty, and we got to a little over an hour. But this is too fat. This is going to be edited down a little bit, because there's many tangents. So yeah. So can I just get a rating, like a rating out of 10, like a 1 out of 10? Not 1 out of 10, but like 1 to 10 for Get Out.
Get Out. I would give it a solid 8, in my opinion.
That's pretty fair. You seemed pretty positive on it. But you have mentioned, it's like, you don't think it's this amazing film.
No, I don't hold it in a high regard where it's flawless and perfect in every way.
Like, I think there were better films that came out that year.
It's no Godfather. It's nothing like that.
Yeah.
It's no The Godfather film. It's no...
I'm going to be honest, I'm not a massive fan of The Godfather. I really think it's...
Really?
No, I watched it, and I was just like, man, this isn't good. I haven't watched Godfather 2 yet, so I might prefer Godfather 2, but I think Godfather is, like, fine. So I'd give Get Out a 7. I think it's a good film, but just like some of the comedy doesn't work, some of the the music doesn't work, and I think that like that's pretty low than what I thought. Like I definitely prefer Us like quite a bit more. I gave Us an 8 out of 10, and this is a 7 out of 10. So it's basically, it's like about the same, but I just think Us has more rewatchability for me than Get Out does.
Yeah.
So I think that's it. Is there any final words you want to say before we wrap this up?
No, I think we've said everything we can say, really.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining me this week. I hope to have you back again in future for future episodes.
I'll look forward to it.
Thank you everyone. Thank you for listening. This was a very long record. My throat is a little bit sore, but that's fine. So hope you enjoyed listening. Again, I guess just go back and listen to any old episodes that you have listened to or haven't listened to, and I will see you all next time. So bye, Rohan.
Bye.
Right.